My name is Erin Bishop. I am with the Oahu Invasive Species Committee, and we're here with some guest panelists tonight to talk about the situation about little fire ant on Oahu. Before we get started, we would like to go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping for folks. And so real quick, we're going to launch a quick survey to gather some demographics. So if you could just fill this out very quickly while we go over the housekeeping, and then we'll go ahead and get started. During this webinar, you can put questions and answers into the chat or the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. During the presentation, Jamie Miller is going to be monitoring the chat and the question and answers. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to go ahead and go over your questions and hear from Joe Kapua. And that's not Joe Watt number 2, that's Kimeona down there. So we are going to hear from them to talk about the issues and how they perceive and how they would like to move forward with the little fire ant response on Oahu. So joining us this evening, we have very special guest panelists. They are all winners of the Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month Awards. So they are the community heroes and Oahu's most valuable player. Together, they will share their ike about the issues that are coming up around little fire ants, how it's affecting them in their neighborhoods and their communities. So starting out, joining us is Kimeona Kane. He's there with the glasses, and he is the chair of the Waimānalo Neighborhood Board and also the director of community outreach for 808 cleanups. We also have with us Kapua Kawelo. She is from Kahaluʻu, and she is a biologist with the Army Natural Resources Program. And we also have Joe Watt. He's joining us right now from Big Island, but he is from Waiheʻe, and he's the community development coordinator with the Key project. So all of them, as I said, mentioned, are recipients for the Hawaii SAM Awards, and very much deservingly so. We're going to talk about the work that they're doing on Oahu. Before we get started, though, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of review, background, and update about the status of LFA on Oahu. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and get that going for you folks right now. All right, so as I said before, we'll just do a little bit of introduction and background about LFA, their impacts, the distribution, what's going on across the state, what's happening on Oahu, and some of the challenges that we're facing that are really having an impact on the management for LFA. Just so to get started, a lot of people are very familiar about this, but we really want to make sure everyone has a good understanding of what it means to be a native species, non-native, and invasive species. So native species, the most simplest explanation, are any plants or animals that made their way to Hawaii without the help of human beings. These are our native and endemic plants and animals, and a lot of them are extremely vulnerable because they did evolve in a place without a lot of pressures. So that makes them very, very vulnerable to incoming threats from invasive species. Non-native species are any plants or animals that arrived with the help of human beings. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that it's an invasive species. So some things that we think of that are beneficial to Hawaii and we associate with Hawaii, like kalo, these are not native to the Hawaiian Islands. However, they are beneficial and they're culturally important as well. When we move into invasive species, however, these are non-native species that were brought to Hawaii on purpose or on accident with people, but they cause harm. And invasive species has to cause harm to our economy, our environment, or our health. And here in Hawaii, if it harms our quality of life, we also take that into consideration. The worst invasive species harm all 4 of those aspects of our lives. Now we have no native ants in Hawaii. They never made their way across thousands of miles of ocean on their own. They were brought here by human beings. Now we have over 65 introduced ant species throughout the islands. There are over 10,000 species of ants across the world. So even though we do have a small minority of them, we do have some really impactful, harmful invasive ants. Some are worse than others, and many people are very familiar with fire ants in Hawaii. This one on here on the left, this is the tropical fire ant. It's fairly large, it's about 1/4 of an inch long. And this is the one that will sting you in parking lots, at the beach, at the soccer fields. They've been here since the 1800s. They're pretty easy to identify. They build mounds in the cracks and crevices, and it almost looks like a dirt pile. Very easy to see their nests. They like sunny, dry, hot spaces, but they also only nest on the ground, which in comparison to little fire ants, this is a fairly recent introduction, only detected on Big Island in 1999, but these are teeny, teeny, tiny ants. They're only as long as a penny is thick, so they're not easily seen with the naked eye. That means that it's really easy for them to move around undetected. One of the hard things about this ant, and it also is one of the things that makes it so impactful, is that it will nest in the trees as well as on the ground. So you won't just get stung on your ankles, you're going to get stung on your face and on your neck and on your torso when they fall out of the trees. Their nests are very hard to find, and they have many, many queens. So it makes their colonies very dense. Little fire ant's actually one of the worst invasive species in the entire world. And that's because it harms all 4 of those aspects I talked about that make a non-native species invasive. They cause harm to our human health. They have a very powerful sting, and because they make these very dense colonies, when you get stung, it's not by 1 or 2 ants, you're going to get 10s, 20 stings around your face and your neck. If you have some sort of allergy to bee stings or mosquito bites, this is going to impact you even more. They also sting animals. So on Big Island, they're seeing this a lot with stray animals that spend time outside in areas that are heavily infested with little fire ants. The animals are attracted to pet food because it has a lot of protein and meat in it. When the animal bends down to eat, the little fire ants will get on their face, and they're attracted to the soft body parts like their eyes. They will get stung repeatedly in their eyes, and it causes this clouded cornea, and it's also very painful for pets, and it's causes an irreversible blindness. They're also harmful for our economy. So if you are someone that has coffee or lychee and you rely on people to pick in your trees, if you have an infestation of little fire ants, no one's going to want to work for you. You cannot exist in areas that have little fire ant without getting stung. So you are either going to have to burden the cost of controlling little fire ants, or you are going to have to do all of the work yourself and get stung. The other thing is that other places in the United States do not want this ant either. So if you are counting on being able to export your crops or your goods, no one's going to be accepting those exports. The other thing with little fire ants, and this is what you see in this middle picture, they actually farm aphids. So aphids and mealybugs, these are agricultural pests. They're sap-sucking insects that damage the production of your crop and the health of your plants. Little fire ants feed on that sugary excretion that these scale insects put out as an alternative food source. They do so much that they will actually pick these aphids and mealybugs up from a leaf that's dead or dying and move them to a healthy part of the plant. And then with Hawaii, tourism is a big driver for our economy. So having guests go visit places like Akaka Falls or beach parks, if it's infested with little fire ants, the county or the state is going to have to treat those because you have to protect visitors as well as residents in Hawaii. And that's where it comes to our environment too. These little fire ants want to live in some of our most valuable, sensitive natural areas like our forested watersheds. They don't just nest on the ground. So ground nesting birds who are already contending with invasive ants, this is going to be a threat to our tree nesting birds as well. Little fire ants will also drive away and predate upon native insects. In areas in New Caledonia, they did an insect survey and they put out insect traps. And when they checked those traps, 90% of every single insect they caught was a little fire ant. There were no other pollinators or anything else in the food chain of their native insects left. And then when we consider our quality of life here in Hawaii, this is not just, it's a nice day to go to the beach, but this is also having a cultural impact as well. So people who utilize and have connections with the land and want to work in the land are not going to be able to do this in a manner that they have been doing for thousands and thousands of years and generations. This ant is known to actually drive people from using their property and their land in a way that they had always done. The reason we kind of get into how little fire ants spread and the biology of them is because this is important to know how to treat them. Little fire ants and most ants, they're social insects, and that means they're ruled by a queen. The entire colony does everything it can to support the queen, and she is the only one that lays eggs. Little fire ants will actually clone their queens. In other types of ant species and in other areas, a little fire ant nest on the trees will meet a little fire ant nest on the ground, and those workers will actually fight for territory because they don't recognize each other as clones or families. But with little fire ant, when those two colonies meet together, they actually start to join forces and work to support multiple queens, not just their singular queen in their nest. And what this leads to is extremely dense infestations with hundreds, if not thousands, of queens pumping out eggs. So you actually get a super colony where all of these ants are working together and they don't do anything to keep their populations down. This means that if you have one infestation in a neighborhood and it starts to spread across other neighborhoods, you can't look at this as 7 or 8 separate colonies. This is actually one massive super colony. When we talk about treatment, you can't just have 7 out of these 8 properties treat, because that's going to leave one entire property that remains infested with the queens, and that population will once again rebound and spread out. So when we do treatment and we talk about community action, this is why it's so important for everyone to understand and work together so that you can treat this entire infestation and look at it as one super colony instead of smaller 8 separate colonies. The status of little fire ant across the state is basically that little fire ant is widespread and uneradicable at this point on Big Island with the resources they have right now. It's in every district on the Big Island. As I said before, it showed up there. It was detected in 1999, and there wasn't good resources or research on how to properly treat these ants. Since that time, the Hawaii Ant Lab was formed and has done research and has found an effective eradication treatment. And that is what the rest of the islands are working to implement to prevent this from being widespread across the state. The way that these ants are moving is that they're so small, they're very hard to see. So it's very easy for them to move undetected in things like plants and cut flowers. But it's not just plants and cut flowers as well. It's things like soil, mulch, gravel, and even vehicles and equipment. If a piece of equipment is spending time more than a day in an area that's infested with little fire ants, it's highly likely that queens have moved in and started to set up a nest there. So it's very easy to move these things into new introductions across the state and across an island. Right now on Oahu, there are 45 active sites. That means these are sites that have either been detected and they are working to delimit them. Once they figure out how big an infestation is, they'll start treatment. So that's an active site. Monitoring sites means that it has gone through a treatment and now they are monitoring the situation for 3 years to make sure there were no queens left so that the population won't rebound. After 3 years, if no fire ants are found, we can say that this is an eradicated site. And so we have 5 eradicated sites on Oahu right now. The one thing I would like to point out is if you're looking at this map and you're saying in the center of the island, my God, there's an active site in Mililani-Mauka, it doesn't mean the entirety of Mililani-Mauka is infested. This might be 20 properties in that location. Some sites are very small. Some sites are only 4 properties. Other sites like Laie is fairly large. You're talking acres. So the site size differentiates. The way that we move forward with little fire ant is when you have a detection at your property, Hawaii Ant Lab and OISC are trying to work together to coordinate a site visit to figure out if it's just your property, or maybe it's the 4 neighbors around you, or maybe it's the entire street that has little fire ants. They sort of spread out like running water. So we have to make sure that we know the edges of the infestation so that we know where to treat. Once we figure out the edge of the infestation, that's called delimiting, that's when the treatment cycle can begin. And there's every 6 weeks treatment cycles that happens over the course of a year. During this treatment cycle, there'll be a midpoint survey to make sure that the treatment's working. And then at the end of the treatment cycle, there'll be another survey to make sure there's no ants left. Then it will move into a monitoring phase. The way the treatment works is there's two different approaches, and they have to be used together because these are arboreal ants, meaning they are in the trees. So we use a toxicant bait. These are little granulars that you can spread on the ground. The workers will feed and take it back to the nest. And then you can see in this diagram, they start to feed the other workers in the nest. And it has to go through about 3 levels of workers before it ever gets to the queen. This is important because this means that it's a low toxicity bait. If you just kill the workers and they don't make it back to the nest to feed the queen, it won't matter. She'll just keep laying eggs and replace those workers. The other thing that is used is an insect growth regulator, and that's because we can mix this up into a gel bait that we can squirt into the trees. We can't throw bait up into a tree and hope that it just sits up in the tree. So this insect growth regulator is a gel that the ants will feed on and do the same thing and take it back to the nest. This is a non-toxicant bait, but what it will do is prevent the queen from laying eggs or prevent her eggs from hatching. So this two-pronged approach has been very, very successful, and it has led to eradications on islands. The good thing is that we can treat according to your property. So it depends on if you have very tall trees, if you're growing edible crops, and the size of the property. The good thing about this treatment is that there's products to address all of that. And one of the biggest questions, of course, is that, is this safe? And the great answer is that yes, it is. As I said before, it's a low toxicant bait, and it's specifically targeted for ants. So you don't have to worry about it impacting bees, pets, kids, your food, even chickens. There are some other things that are going on, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but in the news, you've been hearing about some nurseries that have been infested with little fire ants and selling plants, and people are buying them. One of the big questions is, why can't we stop this from happening? And that was due to this Department of Agriculture rule, which is in Chapter 72. Over the past 12 months, they had rewritten this rule to give clear authority to the Department of Agriculture and provide them with straightforward rules that would allow them to make this stop. This has already undergone a review by the Small Business Advisory Board. They had public hearings about this. The governor signed off on it. The only thing that's preventing it from becoming a permanent rule right now is review from Department of Agriculture, because they have to go through all the comments that they received during the public hearing. There was widespread support for this. But because this is such a active issue, and this is still an issue that's being kind of spread across the island, the Department of Agriculture issued this interim rule. So this does give them the clear authority to stop movement of infested materials. They also, this legislative session, got approved for a $20 million invasive species package that will support biosecurity. Within this bill, there is $2.5 million allocated to little fire ant response, totally dedicated to little fire ant. This is outside of coconut rhinoceros beetle. This is outside of hiring. This is completely dedicated to little fire ant response. If you're interested in this bill, this QR code will take you to the bill and you can read it in detail. As I've last heard, this bill is now with the governor's office. So, and he released this statement saying that, like all bills, they must go through a legal, fiscal, and policy review for their administration to make sure there's no flaws or problems that would prevent them from enacting it. And so that's where it is right now. I mentioned before that we have 45 active sites on Oahu. And when you look at the numbers on the left-hand side, you can see in the past 4 years, we've doubled the active site detection. This is partly due because people are becoming more aware, and they are now testing their yards and their properties. The other part of this is because little fire ants have probably been in their yard for 4 or 5 years, and they're starting to get stung now because they have so many ants. What I would like to point out to this, though, is that even though we've more than doubled the amount of detections in the past 4 years, we have not had an increase in the staff. We still remain with Hawaii Ant Lab as the lead, with just 2.5 people trying to address 45 sites. The Hilo staff for Hawaii Ant Lab has been helping the Oahu folks trying to coordinate community efforts, but it is a massive undertaking. The Hawaii Ant Lab doesn't really have any certain or secured funding at this point. So they don't know what the next year is going to look like. Oahu now has the outreach support for OISC. We have 2 people on our outreach team, and we've been doing outreach about little fire ant for 10 years now. We distribute the test kits, we identify all of the ant samples, we go to events, presentations in schools, and we've just gotten funding to hire a community engagement liaison that's going to focus on little fire ant. We do expect some funding coming our way. We've secured funding with the Department of Defense called the REPI grant. We are waiting for that award to be released, though, and we've been waiting for a while, but this is going to allow us to hire 4 full-time people dedicated to little fire ant and koki frog, as well as 1 kupu intern. In the meantime, we are still waiting for our HISC account to fully open. Because it's taken so long for our HISC account to open, we're going to actually have 12 to 15 months of funding that we have to spend down in 9 months. So we are trying to strategize, and what we would like to do is hire 4 temporary positions right away and help Hawaii Ant Lab get caught up on these 45 sites. We've also submitted a proposal through the University of Hawaii for DLNR funding. If we get awarded this funds, it will add enough money to have possibly 3 to 4 additional full-time people for LFA and koki. So we are waiting on this funds, and we are hoping to onboard 4, maybe 8 people if we get the DLNR funding to respond to LFA. Department of Agriculture, as I mentioned, has $2.5 million for the LFA response, but we don't yet know what that response will be. If it's going to be dedicated to inspectors, nursery inspections, and it's unclear at this point if any of that money is going to be going towards helping residents that are infested with little fire ant. What you can do at this point, we're going to find out more from our panelists, but we always please check your yard at least once a year, collect and submit your ants for identification. Always check your plants for ants, whether you buy it at a box store, a nursery, or if someone gifts you a plant. If you plan on donating or giving plants away, check those plants for little fire ants as well. It's very easy. It's the peanut butter chopstick test, and it's on the website. And should we contact you asking if we can survey your yard for little fire ant, that means someone in your neighborhood has had a positive detection, and we're trying to figure out how big that infestation is. We really need to find the boundaries of these infestations and treat all known infestations in order to stop this from spreading and becoming a part of our everyday life. And with that, there are a lot of people that are working towards this effort, but I really would like to share now what our panelists have to say. So we will get right into that. So thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. I have a few questions that I'd like to go through, and I'll just tag each of you. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about all of this, because you guys are heavily involved in this issue. So the first question, and I would like to hear from all 3 of you, but we'll start with Kimeona, is how did you get involved with this issue, and why is this such a concern for you?
Mahalo nui, Aaron. Thank you guys so much for your time. The question of how we got involved was actually through you some years ago at the neighborhood board level, where we were introduced to invasive species and some of the proactive outreach that OISC was conducting. And what that brought was a heightened awareness of how these infested spaces or infestations could take place in our communities. More recently, my work in Waimānalo really was spurred on by an experience at a nursery and purchasing plants at a nursery, which became positive or tested positive for LFA. And that's what really took me down the course that I'm in right now of really trying to work towards much more transparency between the departments and between our community and between the different agencies that are doing work in Waimanalo. And so, yeah, it was an unfortunate circumstance of buying plants from a nursery and now being kind of consumed in the work necessary to correct this. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. Mahalo.
Yeah, thank you. Kapua, can you give us a little bit of background about how you got involved and why this concerns you so much?
Yeah, so I'm ashamed to say that I've known about LFA on Oahu for a long time, but it wasn't until it was sort of in my backyard and knocking on my door. I work in conservation. I do this for a living. It was always sort of like somebody else is dealing with it, until my neighbor, who has, at that point, she was less than a year old, cute little girl, said, "Oh my God, I have little fire ant. What do we do? How are we gonna, we have to figure out how to deal with this." And so then I talked to Chris Froelich at a Hawaii Ant Lab, and he sort of gave me the layout of what was going on. And we started by just gathering, neighbors that were willing to go talk to other neighbors and, get the word out. We actually did the initial delimiting testing, putting the peanut butter sticks out. And then have taken it from there to doing the control with amazing community volunteers. Couldn't do it without them. Our neighborhood kicks butt.
Yeah, thank you. You guys are doing a lot of good work. And then that's very much relates to Joe's experience. Do you want to talk about how you got involved, Joe, and why it's such a concern?
Sure. So I, similar to Kapua, I have also known about little fire ants for a while. Before I worked at Key Project, I was part of the Kokua Hawaii Foundation, and I was working with school gardens, so I've been aware of the issue for a while. Kapua kind of gifted me this situation or awareness of this situation in that a community member from right up the road from Key Project tested positive for little fire ants, and Aaron shared that information at a community event that we were hosting. And that person, who had been getting bitten in their yard for several years at that point, sent in a test kit that was given to them by their relative who had been organized by Kapua and Joby. So yeah, I think to sum all of that up, I care a lot about the environment. I care a lot about Pilina with Aina, and I think that we cannot overstate how significant of a change having little fire ants well established here on Oahu would be. And when the opportunity to be deeper involved in this came about because of the proximity of an infestation, I just knew that it wasn't a kuleana that I could back away from. And I think I was lucky in that Aaron and OISC came to an event at Key Project and informed us in person that there was this nearby infestation, because when you look at that map and you know that there are 50 infestations that have been identified, and that's just identified because there may be more infestations that are out there. Not everyone knows that these little fire ants are on their block or one block away. And so I very strongly recommend that you take the time to go find out who in your neighborhood has been getting these letters, because if you live in Windward Oahu, if it's not you, it's your cousin, it's your auntie, it's your neighbor, it's someone you went to school with, or it's one of your coworkers, because they are fairly widespread. At the same time, I would say that a lot of that is trying to scope out the size of these infestations. So, but if you know 100 people, one of those 100 people has received a mailer from OISC. So there you go.
We send a bunch out.
Yeah.
So for the people that are joining us, Joe and Kapua, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing? You'd say, oh yeah, I'm helping my community, but legit, like, what does that look like for you? And Kapua, we'll start with you. I think you were the first one to really start doing the community work. So what do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, it starts with surveys, right? It starts with talking to your neighbors. And I think that it's so much more meaningful when it's somebody from your own community who can relate a story to you about being stung or knowing somebody down the road that got stung. It's easy to engage with people and get them to respond positively to you. It's easier if you're a neighbor, a community member, a friend, than, Oahu Invasive Species Committee or HAL going door to door. So we did that, and, you just amplify your effect and your ability to do that work the more people you get involved from your community. So we did that first, and we had 3 disconnected sites in Kahaluʻu that we're working on. Some of them are probably over 10 acres, big agricultural size lots, acre size lots. So similar to Waimānalo, right? Kind of daunting. And then, and then just sort of started helping to message about, what this means, right? Just like Joe said, like, I am a Aina person, right? I'm outdoors as much as I possibly can be. And I know that Joe and Kimeona are also, and many people on this call probably. I do not want to, be limited in what I can do in my backyard, and being able to share that with your neighbors and your community members, I think really helps to engage them. And then we started doing actual control. So we shadowed the HAL folks. Chris Froelich came and taught us how to mix, and how to do the application. What it looks like is that you have backpack sprayers that you fill with this tango bait that is kind of the consistency of pancake batter. It's a little bit of a pain to mix, to be quite honest. It involves peanut butter, oil, tango, help me out, water, and
Xanthan
gum. The xanthan gum is the thickener. And so we do this every 6 weeks, and maybe we need to be doing every 4 to 6 weeks, I hear, in our garage, put down cardboard, bucket, we put all the ingredients in, and we have a paddle mixer attached to a corded drill. And so somebody stands there just mixing, and you have to add the xanthan gum real slowly. You have to emulsify the oil with the peanut butter. So it's kind of like messy, to be honest. And then, so we fill the backpack sprayers with those and hand sprayers. And the way you apply that is you slap it up into the trees. So the reason it's thick is because then you get it up high where the nests are. So you make these, what they called X's on all the vegetation. So if you have tea leaves, you got to go, X on every tea leaf, both sides. And then at the same time, we're doing something easier in combination with that. We're applying a granular bait called Amdro. I know there are other options too. We might be switching at some point. But it's a whirlybird, the thing you use to apply fertilizer to your lawn, or a blower. It's opposite of, you're blowing, instead of seed out of this blower, you're blowing this bait, and it can get it up, high into the trees, into the cruxes of palms and the vegetation. So, and sometimes that's in people's yards. So knock, knock, aloha, I'm Kapua. We're treating for a little fire ant. Is it okay if we treat your yard? And then we usually have a team of 2. One person's doing the tango, one person's doing the bait, and you walk door to door through these lots. And then you kind of got to go the residential part and then like the wild areas. So you sort of have different teams trying to address it all and treat the whole area as thoroughly as possible every 6 weeks. And we do a lot, like I said, do a lot of talking to community members, helping to alleviate any of their concerns about, what we're applying, reminding them that this is an every 6 week treatment. So I think that what Joe can add. I know he wants a drone.
Yeah, I would say my biggest goal is to pretend to be Kapua and be really on it with these treatments. But at the same time, I think the most impactful thing that I did was just understanding the very limited capacity that OISC and the Hawaii Ant Lab have to address these things. Like, I found the person who had the single positive sample in our neighborhood. I got put in contact with her by Hal because they are very careful with people's personal information. They were checked in with, consented to be contacted, and I went up there, and me and this community member went around knocking on people's doors, putting down peanut butter sticks, and keeping track on a sheet of paper of which addresses we were collecting from, so that we could drop off a huge stack of samples to Erin and make sure that when people are looking at all of these different sites on a spreadsheet, that they understood that we are not just one person getting bit in their banana patch, but we are 10 houses where people are getting bit inside of their kitchens. People are getting bit when they're sitting on their porch. People are getting bit when they're trying to eat lunch on the grass. People are getting bit when they're trying to do yard work. In order to put a little bit of pep in the step of the folks who are tasked with providing us with the solutions and treatments and answers in order to resolve this situation. There were several people in the community that, despite LFA information being put out there in as many ways as people have the ability to put them out there, there were a lot of people who had no idea what little fire ants were. And so I found myself answering the same 6 questions very regularly, like, what the hell are these? What are we supposed to do about it? How come nobody's doing anything about it? Oh, wait, there's 5 different organizations that do things about this. What are they? What do they do? How do they interact with each other? And then how come you're the one that's out here right now? And those are all questions that I think are really important to have answers for. But the reason why I share that is because, as much as I have also gone out there and tried to organize volunteer groups in the same way that Kapua has, I think that the most impactful thing is communicating those answers out to the neighborhood, so that instead of them getting it from a DLNR email blast, where, like, who really reads those very closely, like, people who come to Key Project for Kupuna Breakfast, or people who have their kids in our youth program, hear me talking about how little fire ants are not an inevitability here on Oahu. We have the treatment, we have the strategy, and what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have at least, like, give me 5 people who are tasked with eradicating this ant on Oahu, because at the start of this year, we only had 1 person on Oahu who was tasked with eradicating little fire ants. And I think that it's important to remember and important to tell your neighbors that when people say that something is impossible, they mean without the amount of funding that is being given to it right now, and the amount of funding that has been received by the organizations doing the most to push back on little fire ants has been appalling. So really, we have the solutions for this stuff. I think organizing the community so that when you come around to do a treatment, you can be really efficient with it. You're not skipping houses because that neighbor is, like, still doesn't really trust the process, or you're not skipping houses because nobody knows who lives there. Filling in those gaps so that people can come in and efficiently do what they're trying to do is a really, really important thing.
Joe's also hosted at Key Project a couple really awesome community meetings to provide that information, to give that background and to explain to people what it's going to look like to do control. So that's been super valuable. Key Project's involvement in this is key, right? Just like what Joe said. Yep.
Thank you. Sorry, that was probably longer than what you guys wanted from me, but there you go.
No, it's fine. That actually leads us into a nice segue that I would like to get Kimeona's take on. With all of these questions and challenges and obstacles that are coming up with us, we don't have a Joe in every neighborhood, and we don't have a Kapua in every neighborhood. So some of these neighborhoods just don't have the ability or the time or the just basic ability to do this sort of really high intensity work, this field work that they're doing. Kimeona, what would you like to see happening? Like, if you could solve this problem in the next 10 years, or what should we really be prioritizing? So yeah, it's nice to have solutions, but why are we prioritizing this too? I think that gets lost a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this problem, like many problems our communities face, it will force us to be Joe and be Kapua. Like, we have to find people within our community that care enough to step to that plate and say, hey, I recognize that there's a problem here and I need to be a part of that solution. The days of just holding, other folks, external folks accountable to this are pretty much done. If we want to impact change in our communities, we have to lead that way. Now, that doesn't mean that people who have accountability, like the Department of Ag, HAL, OISC, it doesn't mean we just sidestep them. It means we learn from them, we build relationships with them, and we really hold accountability across the board. Waimānalo's circumstance is much different than the Kahaluʻu circumstance with Joe and Kapua. We had infestation at some pretty specific locations in the nursery industry. And it didn't have this huge widespread acreage across residential space that we are aware of today. That doesn't mean that it might not be there. It just means we haven't tested enough to truly come to an understanding of what that looks like. What it means to me is we have to find the Joes and the Kapuas and just anyone in these communities that care enough for their community to not allow this to take place. We have to find the folks that are involved and want to be involved. And even if they know nothing, to trust the people that do, like HAL, like OISC, and give guidance and give grace to people like the Department of Ag and even our elected officials to an extent. We have to hold them accountable too. They've known about this incident in Waimanalo's circumstance. Our elected officials knew about this for a long time, right? And so we have to be transparent about it and we have to hold each other accountable. I'm really excited to share that, our Waimanalo Ag Association is really trying to ramp up their outreach to this issue. They really want to get ahead of it because while Waimanalo has kind of been frowned upon, meaning people know about it and didn't do anything, in some eyes, I've had such wonderful discussions with people in the ag who want to make changes because nobody wants little fire ants in our community. Nobody. And my heart goes out to our Hawaii Island people because they've lived with it for so long. And we have to find respite for them too. Like, we got to get so good at this that we do have a chance of going back to Hawaii Island and investing in the eradication there as well. So in 10 years, Erin, I hope we develop such beautiful communities surrounding issues like this that we then can send an all-star team to Hawaii Island and kokua them and really serve Hawaii as a whole, because our intra-island and inter-island is very important to all of us. It's not just for economy, it's for life. And so we cannot move without haste. We have to take action, and it goes to all levels and all communities.
So with that, Kimeona, what sort of advice would you give to somebody if they're listening to you right now and they're moved to action, they want to do something? Where would you suggest they start? What are some of the things that they could do right off the bat?
Yeah, call Joe at Key Project. No, what they can do
Joe,
first and foremost.
Real busy, Joe.
Honestly, though, I have time for it. Call me. Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
No, what can happen first and foremost, Erin, is one, we have to get educated. Right. And who are those people? That's the Hawaii Ant Lab. That's OISC. That's the Department of Ag. That's really touching in on all of those people and saying, hey, I don't know anything about this. I've heard that it's a problem. What resources do you have for just a normal community person who doesn't maybe do INA, but has a large property, doesn't have maybe the mobility to get into their property and do things, but it's about being conscious enough of the issue to then make more informed decisions. For example, if you hire a landscaping company, do they have familiarity with invasive species? And asking that to be a part of the contract, in your conversations at the supermarket. Hey, did you guys hear about this? When you're thinking about buying plants or you're attending a party, these conversations don't have to be done in back rooms. They can be done in the general day public, because it has to be a part of that. So finding a way to connect to resources is super, super important. We cannot achieve the outcomes that we want without first getting informed. And I think being a part of that with the entities mentioned are very important for us. And then from there, Aaron, it's really a matter of choice. Like what do I physically have ability to do? Because maybe I don't have the physical ability to go door to door, but maybe I can offer funding. Maybe I can host a group meetup place. Maybe I can host a bathroom and water break for the people that are out there. Getting involved in the community is so important. And yes, to the comment in the chat, then finding out how do you hold people accountable, including our neighbors, but certainly our elected officials, especially after this legislative session, both at the state level, federal level, and county level. No elected official today can say that they do not know about this issue now. And so holding it to them is very important. And if the political realm is not your jam, I hate to say this out loud, but I'm going to because we have to. You need to make it your jam. Like 20 million, 2 million, 2.5 million is not enough to address this issue, right? It is not enough by far. So we have to continue to put political pressure where it needs to happen, and we have to hold ourselves accountable as well. Mahalo.
Yeah.
I would just add neighborhood boards are a good place, to just get connected with, bring it to your neighborhood board, or if you have a neighborhood watch coordinator, which I am for my community. So that was another helpful thing that I already was in contact with a lot of neighbors, that would be a good way to message, see if there are people who are physically able to, come out and actually do the control.
Even associations, homeowner associations, they need to be aware of it as well.
Yeah, Joe, do you want to add any advice for people on what they can do to get involved? They're just hearing about this, they want to help. Call you. That's what Kapua said.
I am more than happy to help activate or encourage anyone who is thinking about taking on a bigger role in their communities to do this. I think that, like, I've done this with a couple of friends out in Kailua around Olomana has a couple of infestations that are not currently delimited. I have a friend that lives around Keolu that's trying to work on the infestation in that area. And like, I went to go sample with them just to be like, hey, if you guys are scared because you've never gone door knocking before, like, I'll go with you. I don't care. Like, I've got time for this. It's going to be on like a Monday evening or something like that. It's going to be on a weekday evening. But if you have time for it, I have time for it, because what I don't have time for is little fire ants being a barrier to cultural practice, to agriculture, to food sovereignty, to me taking the youth program into the mountains that I run. Like, the kids can barely handle mosquitoes. They're not going to be able to handle little fire ants. And we have enough of barriers to those things as it is right now. We cannot afford to let little fire ants become one, because we couldn't get organized as a community, or because we could not get our legislators to fund the organizations that are doing the work. So I think that's what it is. Go out there, test. If you go out and test your yard, test your auntie's yard, test your cousin's yard, test the elementary school your kid goes to, keep peanut butter in your car. It stays good for a really long time. I send in a lot of samples just because it's easy to do that.
I'm just gonna add, it totally works, right? Like,
Yeah.
when we did the first treatment, like, people were just getting lit up, like ants falling down the back of their shirts and stung all the way down their back. And now we do these treatments, nobody gets stung the whole day. We're 4 treatments in, but it totally works. So what Kimeona said, right? Like, we gotta make this a priority. We gotta win this battle. 10 years from now, eradication. Like, that's where I am. So I'll kokua you, Joe, if there's people who need a helping hand with mixing or whatever, because we're so good at that, making mess in our garage. Yep.
I think I also want to echo what Kimeona said about the time for hesitance around engaging with politicians is like, they're around, they're in the community a lot of the time. If there's open like town halls and stuff like that, go and meet these people. They're around. I've, in the last 6 months, built really strong relationships with a lot of legislators on the windward side because I showed up at these meetings. And I think it's really important to keep an eye on where some of this stuff is, because of things like, as Erin mentioned in her presentation earlier, the $2.5 million for LFA response, which is outside of outreach budget, is I think 5 times the state budget that the Hawaii Ant Lab has received in past years. So like that is supposed to be spent down this year, and is on us to make sure that we have eyes on that money to make sure that it is being spent impactfully. I think we all can think of examples of state money that was spent. They were good at spending the money, but I don't know if the services were completely received. And so it's really important that we are keeping track of where that stuff goes. The expectation should be that if we organize ourselves as a community, that they will come in and help like deliver the service. I think making sure as well that we don't let people walk away from Kuleana that cannot be taken by anyone else. Like, I don't know, like there is something that needs to be regulated here, and I think that we need to make sure that we expect people to do that part of their job. Like regardless of whether or not Department of Agriculture has regulated nurseries in this way in the past, there's nobody else that's going to do it. It is an agricultural business issue. So I think that community members should expect that the Department of Agriculture is making sure that agricultural products are safe. In the same way that, I don't know, the Department of Health makes sure that restaurants are safe. DLNR shuts down businesses that are exploiting natural resources. There's a lot of other ways that similar things happen out there. So hold people who get paid more money than you to higher expectations. I think I'm wandering here, I guess, but there's a lot
I would also
of
add
work
that
to do.
as a consumer, you have the power of your dollar, right? So if you're going to buy a plant, ask them and be ready to walk away if they can't tell you that they are treating regularly or testing regularly for little fire ant, that they're totally on board and knowledgeable but about the issue if they did walk away. I say the same thing about landscaping companies, like talk to them every single day. There's somebody that I can engage with about little fire ant, whether it's somebody harvesting heliconia on the side of the road when I'm walking and I'm saying, hey, you know, be careful because there's LFA in this area or whatever. There's so many ways you can spread the word, even if you're not actually somebody out there controlling them.
I think one final thing I wanted to shout out is like if you are a rooted community group in a neighborhood and you want to try and do more, if that's like a scout troop, if that's a church group, if that's a nonprofit, if that's a bunch of your friends that go volunteer in a lo'i, like I met all of the neighbors on the street from my community center by going door to door and helping do little fire ant surveys. I have built, my organization has built a lot of community rapport by going out and working with our neighborhood about this. If you are an organization that would like to do that, regardless of whether or not there's currently little fire ants in your neighborhood, like I would love to talk to you about what you need to do to prep for that day, how to go door to door, like what houses to avoid, or like don't go places where there's sketchy dogs, all the little tips to help build that rapport with folks. I think it's a really useful thing. And so to reiterate, if you have a group of people and you want to do something really significant for your community and you don't know what to do and you're like, who's doing this? I am more than happy to talk story with you. Call Erin, and if Erin's like, you should talk to Joe about this, just know that I will show up. But also, I'm not the one that did 10 years of research to figure out the methodology, so sometimes I will not have the answer, but I will make sure to point you in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think what we're seeing in the chat is a lot of suggestions on what types of groups would be great. And it's really any group. It's a halau. It's canoe clubs, golf buddies, pet owner groups. If you are part of one of these groups and you would like to have a little Zoom meeting with your buddies, or you would like us to come out and do an in-person presentation, you can reach out to OISC. OISC@hawaii.edu is my email. You can call our office. We'd be more than happy to come and talk with your group about the situation. We can also provide you very direct details about what's going on in your community. So if you are in Mililani Mauka, we can be a little bit more direct, like how far away are you from this infestation? We can let you know if they need help, and we can put you in contact with those people. We can make the connections for you. And then another comment in the Q&A in the comment chat is, what is the city and county doing? And this is the first year, and this is honestly one of the main reasons that Kimeona was up for this award, is that he put pressure at his neighborhood board to city and county officials. What are you doing? And they did not have an answer for that. Maui has a lot of success with little fire ant management because they get annual dedicated funding for their project. So this year, the city and county put out a resolution that they are committed to doing something about this. And we're hoping in the future, they will actually put some action behind that. But they have, the awareness is there, and they've put it in writing, and they passed that little resolution. Yeah, we're going to start doing something about this. So this community conversation, I said before, we've been talking about it for 10 years. It's really not been elevated until this year, because we have community leadership, and there's people are willing to talk and ask the good questions of elected officials and of their neighbors. So I really can't thank you guys enough for sharing this, and the impact is amazing, and it's very much appreciated. So I'm going to ask Jamie, is there anything that we've missed? We have a couple minutes left in the chat and the Q&A. I haven't really been looking at it too much, but if there's anything that we should address or comments that people would like to have.
Yeah, so there's a few questions just about kind of what you just touched on, just how can the city help? And Joe did mention that the city and county of Honolulu just passed a resolution to acknowledge the responsibility to manage invasive species, which is great. But we'd also like to see like how Maui County provides a lot of funding for invasive species management. We'd like to see that come here as well. And then other questions kind of along the same lines, but more in reference to like UH. How can our island community influence UH with respect to urgency of releasing or asking for funding to be implemented? So really just based around how can we get more funding to this important issue.
Yeah, a lot of times the administrative process to releasing funds to projects like OISC has to go through the university. And if they're understaffed, that creates a giant backlog with all their projects. It's just this big snowball effect. So if you would like to advocate on the behalf of administering funds, then you can reach out to RCUH, the Research Corporation at the University of Hawaii, and express your concerns, but you can also reach out to your local legislators. University of Hawaii is a state, it's a state agency, so they're absolutely people that can help with that. And that's with any legislator. Somebody mentioned neighborhood boards. I talked about how Kimeona is the chair of the Waimānalo neighborhood board. It was really him asking those tough questions. So if you are involved with your neighborhood board and you don't really hear this topic being talked about, maybe you're in Honolulu, this really isn't, I mean, maybe when it comes to CRB, but you might not be hearing about some of these, what people might consider, which it's not a rural issue, but this is very much an urban issue as well. You can bring it up to your neighborhood board chair and co-chair and ask them to start asking questions about this. And like I said, OISC is more than happy to come out and give updates to any group whatsoever. So I do want to be respectful of people's time. If you have questions that you still would like to ask, my email is in the chat. It's oisc@hawaii.edu. If you would like to connect with any of these people, we're happy to make that connection. And then at the very end of this, we're gonna just launch another quick survey. So before you go, if you could just please fill it out, it's just some demographics. And we can go ahead and do that. So mahalo nui, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing.
Thank you for organizing this and all the good work that Oahu Invasive Species Committee does and Hawaii Invasive Species Council. Mahalo.
Thank
And
you.
Al. Aloha.
Excellent.
Mahalo everyone for your attention on this. It's very important.
We have that poll up for anybody as they're exiting. Let me go ahead and fill that out real quick before you leave.
Wonderful. So thank you all. You're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. Much appreciated. And we will